only to learn she's a CEO's daughter who falls for him. The rain came down in heavy sheets over Pine Ridge, pounding the trees and soaking the moss-covered ground. Wind howled through the forest, ripping at branches until some gave way with sharp cracks. Thunder rolled across the mountains, lightning flashing violently above. Amid the storm, a small wooden cabin stood firm, its chimney puffing smoke that vanished into the gray sky. Inside, a man crouched by a flickering fire, feeding it with twigs and bark. His hands were rough, his beard streaked with gray. He wore a worn flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up to weathered arms. His name was Ben, 38. A man of solitude, shaped by silence. His eyes held a sadness that spoke in stillness. Then a sound sliced through the wind, a scream, high and desperate. Ben froze, listening. Another scream followed, a woman, and she was in trouble. He grabbed his jacket and rushed into the storm. Rain hit him like needles, soaking through instantly. He moved quickly, scanning the path ahead until he spotted her, near a rocky incline, sitting in the mud, one knee bloodied, her soaked hair clinging to her face. Her clothes, too polished for the forest, were torn and drenched. "Stay back," she shouted, scrambling away, pain flashing in her eyes. Ben halted a few feet away, hands raised. "You're hurt, let me help." "I said stay back," she snapped, her voice shaking. "You can't walk out of here, your knee's injured. Storm's not letting up. I've got a cabin nearby, dry clothes, heat. You stay here, you'll get hypothermia." She hesitated. Then another gust of wind hit, knocking her sideways. She cried out. Without asking again, Ben stepped forward, lifted her easily, and began walking. "Put me down," she yelled, pounding his shoulder. "I'll scream." "You already did," he muttered, focused on getting them out of the storm. After 10 grueling minutes, they reached the cabin. Ben kicked open the door and carried her inside, laying her gently on a folded blanket near the fire. She pushed herself back, eyes sharp with suspicion. "Who are you? Why should I trust you?" Ben stood above her, soaked and unreadable. "If I meant you harm, I wouldn't have carried you through a mudslide." She glanced at her phone, no signal. A single bar flickered and vanished. Tears welled in her eyes. "This can't be happening," she whispered. "How far are we from town?" Ben didn't answer. He knelt, pulling out a first aid kit. "Let me see your knee." She recoiled. "Don't touch me." "Fine," he said, setting the kit beside her. The fire crackled. Rain hammered the roof. "I'm sorry," she said quietly after a while. "I was just scared." Ben ladled soup from a pot over the fire, poured it into a dented metal bowl, and handed it to her. She took it with trembling hands. The warmth surprised her. She sipped. "Thank you," she murmured. Ben said nothing. He sat across the room, drying his jacket, eyes fixed on the flames. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside something shifted, uncertain, fragile. She looked at him again, softer this time. "What's your name?" "Ben," he said finally. "I'm Isabel," she replied. "I didn't mean to get lost. I was just trying to get away from everything." He gave a slow nod. "You came to the right place for that." And with those few words, the silence between them began to crack, just a little, not broken, but no longer empty. The storm outside howled, but in the glow of the fire, 2 strangers sat, slowly beginning something neither could name yet. Morning broke gently over Pine Ridge, the storm having finally passed in the night. The forest, still soaked and dripping, shimmered in the pale gold of dawn. Inside the cabin, the warmth from the fire lingered, the scent of pine wood and smoke mingling in the air. Isabel stirred under a wool blanket, blinking at the unfamiliar room. For a moment, she looked at peace, until the memories of the previous day rushed back. She sat up, wincing as her knee reminded her it was far from healed. The cabin was small, but surprisingly tidy. Her gaze landed on Ben, who was standing near the window, shirt sleeves rolled up again, sipping something from a tin cup. He didn't notice her at first. She cleared her throat. "You live out here? Alone?" He glanced back briefly, then returned his gaze to the trees. "Yeah." "Why?" she asked gently, curiosity more than intrusion in her voice. He didn't answer. "I mean, no offense, but this isn't exactly normal. Most people don't just disappear into the woods. Ben turned, his face unreadable. Most people don't have a reason to. Isabel hesitated, then decided not to press further. Well, thank you. For last night. For the soup, the fire, not letting me die. Ben nodded once and returned to stoking the fire. Isabel shifted and reached for her jacket, digging inside the pocket for her phone. It was still dead. She sighed and pulled out her wallet to look for an ID or card that might help once she got back into town. As she did, the wallet slipped from her hand and fell to the floor, its contents spilling slightly. Ben bent down before she could and picked it up. He was about to hand it to her when his eyes froze on something inside. A small white plastic card with bold letters at the top. Isabel Carson. His hand tightened around the wallet. A strange silence took over the room. Isabel noticed the shift instantly. What? Ben looked up at her, a strange, hollow expression on his face. Carson, she frowned. Yeah, Isabel Carson. He dropped the wallet onto the floor as if it had burned him. His jaw clenched, and his entire posture changed, rigid, tense. Unbelievable, he muttered, stepping back. Of all people, it had to be you. Excuse me? She asked, confused by the sudden change in him. Ben's voice was low and bitter. Carson, Walter Carson, your father? Isabel slowly nodded, now wary. Yes. Do you know him? Ben laughed, but there was no humor in it. Know him? I know what he is, what he's done. Your father is the reason my family lost everything. Her mouth parted in disbelief. What are you talking about? He turned away, pacing once before spinning back to face her. 10 years ago, your father's company bought out this land, claimed eminent domain, said it was for eco-development. Bulldozed homes, displaced families. My family. This forest was my home. My parents built our house with their bare hands. We were forced out. My mother, she never recovered. She died 2 years later, heartbroken, homeless. Isabel stood frozen. I didn't know. Of course you didn't, he snapped. You were probably off at some private school, sipping imported lattes, blissfully unaware of the lives your father was destroying. That's not fair, she shot back. I was a teenager. I didn't run his company. Ben's eyes narrowed. No, but you reaped the benefits. Private jets, city condos, all on the backs of families like mine. Her voice rose. You don't know me. Don't act like you do. I know enough, Ben replied sharply. You're just another spoiled rich kid playing adventurer in the woods, thinking a few scratches and some rain make for a good story at dinner parties. Isabel's cheeks flushed red, whether from anger or shame she wasn't sure. You think I came out here for fun? You think I enjoy getting lost, falling off cliffs and sleeping on cabin floors with a stranger who clearly hates me? Ben's eyes flashed. I don't hate you. I hate what you represent. That was the last straw. Isabel stepped forward, wincing from her knee but unfazed. You think you have the monopoly on pain? You lost your home. I lost my mother when I was 6. My father buried himself in work and forgot how to be human. I've been alone in a house full of staff for most of my life, so don't you dare talk to me about lattes and privilege when you don't know a damn thing about me. Ben didn't speak. His jaw was tight, the muscles in his neck straining. She stared at him, chest heaving. You want to hate my father? Fine. But don't blame me for what he did. He looked at her for a long time, something flickering behind the storm in his eyes, but instead of softening, his expression hardened. You don't get it, he said coldly. You'll never get it. Without warning, Isabel raised her hand and slapped him, hard. The sound cracked through the cabin like another bolt of lightning. They stood there, both stunned by what just happened. Isabel's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I thought you were different, she whispered. But you're just like him, angry, cold, and completely incapable of seeing people beyond your pain. She turned away, limping toward the cot in the corner, wrapping herself in silence and a blanket she no longer found comforting. Ben stood frozen, breathing hard, staring at the floor. The wallet still lay where he had dropped it, the name Carson staring up at him like a ghost. Outside, the forest had calmed. But inside the cabin, a different storm had just begun. The rain hadn't let up. Though the storm had calmed from its earlier fury, it now fell in a cold, steady curtain that shrouded the forest in a soft gray haze. The wind had quieted, but the trees still murmured, heavy with water and secrets. Inside the cabin, the air was warmer but tense, thick with the silence that had settled between Ben and Isabel. Neither had spoken since the argument, since the slap. Ben sat by the fire, slowly whittling a piece of wood, the blade clicking rhythmically, his back to her. Isabel lay curled on the cot, the blanket wrapped tightly around her, unmoving. She hadn't touched the food he had left for her. Her breaths were shallow, her silence like a wall between them. Then Ben heard something, a sound so faint it was almost swallowed by the crackle of the fire. A whimper. He turned. Isabel was trembling. Her face was flushed, her lips dry and pale. Beads of sweat clung to her forehead, and her eyes fluttered behind closed lids. "Isabel?" he said, his voice cautious. She didn't respond. He moved to her side, crouched down, and touched her shoulder. Her skin was burning. "Isabel," he said again, louder now. Still no answer. Then came a whisper, soft and broken. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't want to become like him." Ben froze. His gaze moved over her, her fevered skin, the way she curled in on herself, the weak grip she had on the blanket. She was burning up. "Damn it," he muttered, and sprang into action. He soaked a cloth in cool water and pressed it gently to her forehead. He adjusted the blanket, careful not to wake her, even as she stirred, moaning softly, trapped somewhere in a fever dream. "I just wanted him to see me," she murmured. Ben sat back on his heels, stunned. The woman he had resented, who he thought had everything, was not just Walter Carson's daughter. She was someone carrying pain of her own. When morning came, the fever broke. Isabel stirred, blinking slowly. Her gaze found him beside the fire, his eyes already on her. "How long was I out?" she rasped. "Most of the day," he said. "Fever hit hard." She sat up slowly, confusion and fatigue still heavy in her expression. I'm sorry." Ben nodded. "You said some things in your sleep." She froze. "Did I?" He hesitated. "You said you didn't want to become like your father." Isabel looked down at her hands, then away. "It's true," she said quietly. "People think being his daughter means I've lived some perfect, polished life, private schools, limousines, luxury, but none of that matters when the one person you need most doesn't know how to love you." Ben said nothing. "My mother died when I was 6, she continued. "She was soft, kind. She sang to me at night. After she was gone, my father didn't know what to do with a little girl, so he didn't try. I was raised by strangers in uniforms. I spent my life trying to earn his attention, his approval, but I was just another fixture in his empire." Her voice cracked. "I came here because I needed to remember who I was before I became someone I couldn't recognize." Ben looked at her, his chest tightening. "You're not the only one who lost someone," he said softly. She turned to him, her eyes wet. "My mom loved this land," he said. "We'd hike together in spring, plant wildflowers by the trails. After Carson's company took it, it broke her. She fought, she resisted, but they crushed her spirit." His voice dropped. "The night she died, we didn't have heat. Our cabin was falling apart. She sat by the window, wrapped in every blanket we had, staring into the snow. Her last words were, 'This place used to feel like home.'" Isabel whispered, "I'm so sorry." Ben nodded, his throat tight. "I blamed your father, and when I saw your name, I blamed you too." A long silence passed between them, no longer filled with anger, but with the raw truth of shared wounds. Outside, the rain continued, softer now, almost gentle. Ben returned to his seat by the fire. Isabel pulled the blanket close, her eyes on the glowing embers. That night, they didn't speak again. Ben lay on the floor, eyes on the ceiling. Isabel curled on the cot, turned toward the wall. Their backs were to each other, but the space between them had shifted. No longer strangers, no longer enemies, just two people holding on to their own pain, learning slowly, silently, how to let go. And outside, the rain kept falling. The next morning, a light mist cloaked the forest, softening the trees into silhouettes. The rain had eased to a drizzle, and Ben finally suggested they try to find their way back. "Should be a couple miles west," he said, tightening his pack. "Storm might have knocked down part of the trail, but we'll manage." Isabel nodded, limping slightly as she followed. Her knee was still sore, but functional. They walked in silence, the forest whispering around them with birdsong and the soft patter of dripping leaves. After a while, Isabel glanced at Ben. "If you'd told me a week ago I'd be hiking with a man who couldn't stand me, I'd have laughed." Ben gave a faint smile. "I never said I couldn't stand you. You didn't have to." They walked a bit farther when Isabel stepped on a slick patch of moss. Her foot slipped, and before she could catch herself, she tumbled down the slope. "Ben?" she cried out. He rushed to the edge and saw her below, about 10 feet down, lying in a narrow rocky crevice, clutching her ankle. "Are you okay?" he called. "I think I twisted it. I can't move." Ben scanned the edges, too steep for a rope, too slick to climb safely. He braced himself and lowered into the gap, maneuvering down carefully until he reached her side. The crevice was cramped, damp, barely wide enough for them to sit. Water trickled down the stone walls and cold settled in quickly. Ben checked her leg. "Not broken, just a bad twist. We'll wrap it when we're out." "If we get out," she whispered. "We will," he said, though he knew help might take hours. As the cold seeped in, Isabel began to shake. Her breathing grew uneven. "Hey," Ben said softly. "You're all right." "I hate small spaces," she gasped. "I feel trapped." He reached for her hand, gently. "You're not alone. I'm right here." She closed her eyes, trying to breathe. "When I was a kid," Ben said, "my mom used to take me to a grove near our cabin. We'd lie on our backs and look through the trees. She said the branches looked like stained glass, like nature's cathedral." Isabel's trembling slowed. "She used to hum a tune she made up," he added. "I never forgot it. It sounded like peace." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, sharing his warmth. She leaned in, her body relaxing into his. "No one ever held me like this," she said quietly. "No stories, no comfort." Ben looked at her, saw the tears forming in her eyes. "You treat me like a real person," she whispered. "Not a title, not a burden." He squeezed her hand gently. "Because that's what you are." She cried softly, not turning away, and he didn't look away either. They stayed close, wrapped in a silence that felt safe, not empty. Eventually, Ben reached into his pack and pulled out a flare. He lit it, and bright orange smoke curled upward through the narrow opening above them, casting a warm glow on the stone walls and their faces. Minutes passed before voices echoed through the trees. "Over here," Ben shouted. "We're down here." Rescue workers appeared at the top. It took time, but ropes were lowered, and they pulled Isabel out first, then Ben. They checked her leg and offered a ride back. Ben helped brush dirt from his pants as Isabel stood nearby, looking at him. "They can take you," he said. "You'll be okay." She didn't move. "I don't want to go yet," she said softly. Ben looked at her, surprised. "If I leave now," she added, "I think I'll lose something I didn't even know I needed." He didn't reply, but his eyes softened. Around them the forest still held the scent of rain and earth, and between them something unspoken remained, fragile, real, and waiting. And for the first time neither of them turned away. The city was a world apart from Pine Ridge, loud, blinding, suffocating in its restlessness. The moment Isabel stepped off the private medical jet onto the rooftop of the Manhattan Hospital, cameras were already waiting. Flashbulbs erupted like lightning. Reporters crowded the sidewalk below with microphones pointed skyward. The headline had spread faster than she imagined. "Heiress rescued by wilderness hero after near-death ordeal." She was a story now, her name back in the press. But for the first time, she did not care about the spotlight. All she could think about was the warmth of a cabin under the pines, the sound of fire crackling, and the man who had saved her, not just from a fall, but from something much deeper. As doctors examined her ankle and the fever she'd recently recovered from, Isabel answered questions half-heartedly. She wasn't really there, not in spirit. 2 days later, her father returned from a business trip in Tokyo. Walter Carson was as composed as ever, tailored suit, silver cufflinks, every strand of his pepper-gray hair in place. But something changed when he walked into her penthouse and saw her sitting in silence by the window. He hadn't expected to see vulnerability in her eyes. "Isabel," he said, voice controlled but edged with rare concern. "You scared everyone." She looked up. "I scared myself, too." He sat across from her. "I read the reports. You were lost for 3 days, injured. A man found you?" She nodded. "His name's Ben." Carson's brow furrowed. "And who is Ben?" She hesitated, then said, "A man who lives in the forest. A man who helped me when no one else could." There was a silence. Carson didn't like unknowns. "Did he contact the media, try to take credit?" he asked. "No," she said sharply. "Hates all this. He didn't even want recognition. He saved me and then stepped back." Carson studied her carefully, then sat back, his voice smooth. "I'd like to thank him." "You'd like to investigate him," Isabel countered. He didn't respond, but the flicker in his eyes betrayed her suspicion. Later that evening, when Isabel called Ben from her terrace, her voice was warm, hopeful. "You should come here, just for a few days. I could show you the city, real food, real coffee, something not cooked over a campfire." Ben chuckled on the other end. "And street lights and traffic and concrete everywhere. You make it sound like a prison. For someone like me, it is." She paused, then added gently, "Please, come, even just to see me." Ben went quiet. "I don't belong there, Isabel," he said at last. "That world, it's yours, not mine." She didn't argue, but her silence said everything. The next morning, in a sleek black car parked beside a corporate skyscraper, Walter Carson reviewed a report with narrow eyes. Name, Benjamin Hart. Age, 38. Former resident of Pine Ridge. Filed lawsuit against Carson Development 10 years ago, disputed land seizure. Case dismissed. Mother, Eleanor Hart. Deceased. Father, unknown. Employment, none. Lives off-grid. Walter set the folder down, his fingers tapping the leather briefcase beside him. "Set up a meeting," he told his assistant. "Private, just him and me." Ben showed up 3 days later at Carson's request, arriving at a quiet office suite atop one of the company's older buildings, far from public eyes. Walter Carson stood by the window, watching the city churn below. "I appreciate you coming," he said without turning around. "I came because your daughter asked me to." Carson smiled thinly. "She's grown attached to you." "That's understandable. Near-death experiences forge strange bonds." Ben said nothing. Carson turned, eyes sharp. "You're not just a man from the woods, Mr. Hart. You're the same man who tried to sue me 10 years ago over Pine Ridge." Ben's jaw tightened, but he remained still. "I remember your mother," Carson continued. "She caused a bit of a stir. But the law sided with us. You lost. But not before I watched my mother die. Cold, broke, and heartbroken." Carson ignored the jab. "I understand your pain, but I cannot allow the past to dictate my daughter's future." Ben narrowed his eyes. "Is that a threat?" "It's a negotiation," Carson said calmly. "You walk away from Isabel and I make sure your name stays clean. I will not expose your past, your failed suit, your bitterness, but if you stay near her I will paint you as a fraud, an opportunist, a man who manipulated a grieving young woman for attention." Ben stared at him in disbelief. "She's not property," he said. "You do not get to trade her like a business deal." "She is my daughter," Carson said, voice cold now. "And you are a ghost of a world we buried a long time ago." Ben didn't respond. He turned and walked out of the room without another word, but his silence spoke volumes. The line had been drawn, and somewhere in that towering city of glass and steel, a battle for more than love had just begun. The forest had begun to shift with the season. The air turned crisper, the leaves taking on shades of rust and gold. Birds flew lower, and the hush between the trees deepened. Ben was repairing the roof of the old cabin when he heard the distant crunch of footsteps. Fast, uneven, familiar. He turned and saw her. Isabel stood at the edge of the clearing, hair tousled from the hike, boots muddied, breath short from the climb. Her eyes locked onto his with something fierce, desperate, and unyielding. He froze. She stepped forward. "You didn't answer any of my calls." Ben returned to hammering. "I figured that was the message." She came closer. "I needed to see you." "You should not have come here," he said, keeping his voice even. "Not after what your father said." "I don't care what he said," she snapped. "I don't care about his money or his threats. I care about you." Ben finally looked at her, really looked, at the sweat on her brow, the fire in her eyes, the trembling in her hands. "I'm not part of your world, Isabel," he said quietly, "and you don't belong in mine." "You don't get to decide that," she said, her voice cracking. "You don't get to walk away from this like it meant nothing." He stepped down from the ladder, set the hammer aside. "It didn't mean nothing," he said. "It meant too much. That's why I'm letting it go." She stared at him in disbelief, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not letting it go, you're running." Ben looked down at his hands. "If I stay, I'll always be the man who brought shame to your family. The lawsuit, the press, your father. He'll never stop, and I won't be the reason you lose everything." "I don't want his everything," she said, tears rising. "I want my own. I want a life that feels real, and I only ever felt that here, with you." Ben swallowed hard but said nothing. When he didn't move, didn't speak, Isabel exhaled shakily. She reached into her coat, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and held it out. "Then at least read this, when I'm gone." He hesitated but took the letter from her hand. She looked at him one last time, her eyes brimming with pain. "You think pushing me away protects me, but it's not protection, it's punishment for both of us." And with that she turned and walked back into the forest. Ben stood in the clearing long after she had disappeared. That night the wind picked up. Leaves rustled outside the cabin, whispering like ghosts around the walls. Ben sat by the fire, the letter unopened on the table beside him. His hand hovered over it for a long time before he finally picked it up. The paper was creased, the ink smudged slightly from where her tears had touched it. "Dear Ben, I grew up in a house with chandeliers and grand staircases and walls so thick they kept out every sound, including the ones I wanted to hear the most. My father filled that house with power but never with love. I would have traded every painting, every car, every gala night for one dinner where he looked me in the eye and asked how I was doing. I used to cry myself to sleep in a room twice the size of your cabin, but in that little space under the pines, with the fire crackling and the storm raging outside, I didn't cry. I felt safe. I felt seen. You think you're not enough for me, but the truth is, you're the only thing that's ever made me feel like I was enough for myself. If I never see you again, I hope you'll remember this. You saved me, not just from the fall, but from the life I was suffocating in. Yours, Isabel." Ben's eyes burned. He let the letter rest in his lap, his gaze locked on the flames dancing in the hearth. Every word echoed louder than the next, carving through the walls he had spent years building around his heart. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, a single tear slipped down his cheek. The call came just after midnight. Isabel's hands trembled as she held the phone, her voice caught between disbelief and fear. "There was a landslide," the voice on the other end said. "Your father was overseeing the site in North Ridge. We lost contact with him hours ago. GP's last showed his signal deep in Sector 4, dense forest, steep terrain, not yet cleared for trails." Isabela's mind raced. That part of the forest was untouched, wild, just miles from Pine Ridge. "There's only one person I know who could find him," she whispered. Hours later, the first light of dawn had barely cracked through the trees when Ben opened the cabin door and saw her standing there, mud on her boots, panic in her eyes. "He's missing," she said, breathless. "My father, in the forest. They can't reach him." Ben's face remained unreadable. "I know what he said, what he did, but I'm begging you, please, Ben. You're the only one who knows that land well enough to find him before it's too late." Ben didn't speak. He simply turned, reached for his old canvas pack, slung it over his shoulder, and walked past her into the trees. The search was silent but swift. Ben moved through the undergrowth like he had never left it, every tree, every shift in wind guiding him like old friends. The terrain grew treacherous, fallen logs, loose rock, broken trail. 2 hours passed, then 3. Finally, near the base of a steep ridge, Ben saw a torn scrap of fabric caught on a branch, dark blue, high-end fabric. Not far from it, he spotted a body slumped against a fallen tree. Walter Carson was unconscious, one leg twisted at an unnatural angle, his face pale, smeared with blood. He was alive, but barely. Ben checked for a pulse, then tore open his pack, pulling out bandages and water. He worked methodically, stabilizing the leg with sticks, dressing the head wound. Carson stirred, groaned in confusion. "Who?" His voice was hoarse, cracked. "It's me," Ben said simply. Carson blinked. When recognition came, his face twisted, not in hostility but in shame. "I thought I was going to die out here," he murmured. "You still might," Ben said, tying the last bandage. "Unless you hold still and let me do this my way." Carson didn't argue. His strength was gone. He let himself be carried, half lifted by Ben's arms as they began the long, slow journey back. The hike took nearly 4 hours. By the time they reached the ranger station, search parties had been dispatched, and Isabel was there, pacing outside. She ran to them the moment she saw them, collapsing into Ben's arms before falling beside her father. "I thought I lost you," she whispered to Walter, gripping his hand. Walter looked from his daughter to Ben. There was no malice now, only exhaustion. And something else, humility. That evening, while medics treated Carson inside the outpost and Isabel spoke quietly with the officers, Ben stood outside, staring at the horizon. The sun was setting, painting the treetops gold. The door creaked behind him. Carson stepped out, leaning on a crutch, bandages across his head. "I owe you my life," he said. Ben didn't turn. "You owe it to your daughter. She's the reason I came." Carson nodded, then said quietly, "You could have let me die out there, and maybe you would have been right to." Ben finally turned. His eyes were calm, firm. "I didn't do it because you deserved saving. I did it because she deserves a father who's worth loving." Carson looked away, jaw tightening. But then his voice broke. "I never knew how to be that," he said. "I thought if I gave her power, wealth, security, it would be enough." "It's not," Ben said. Carson's eyes filled. He turned away, wiping them quickly, but the tears had already fallen. Ben didn't say more. He stepped away, leaving Carson alone with the silence, with the weight of every choice he had made. But healing, like the forest, often begins in quiet places, and some redemption must be earned, not through words, but through change. 1 year after the storm that changed everything, Pine Ridge had come alive again. Soft moss covered the forest floor, wildflowers pushed through sun-dappled shadows, and the trees stood tall and welcoming. In the heart of the woods, a new wooden building stood nestled among the pines, a home not just built, but born from something deeper. It was called Pine Shelter Center. The structure was simple but thoughtful, designed to embrace the land, not replace it. A wide porch wrapped around the cabin, and above the entrance, a hand-carved sign read, "Pine Shelter, where every wound finds a home." On this day, a crowd had gathered. Veterans, children in foster care, local elders, volunteers, and people whose lives had once unraveled but were slowly being stitched back together. Ben stood quietly near the porch, his linen shirt lightly wrinkled, his beard neatly trimmed. Beside him, Isabel looked elegant in forest green, clutching her notes with slightly trembling fingers. She stepped forward to speak. "This place wasn't created out of charity," she said, voice clear. "It was born out of necessity. The need to heal, to remember, to begin again." She glanced at Ben. He nodded quietly. "I lost myself once in these woods," she continued, "and I found something far greater than survival. I found truth. I found love. And I found the courage to build a life that mattered, not one I inherited, but one I chose." Applause followed, soft and heartfelt. For a moment, the forest seemed to breathe with them. Then, from the edge of the clearing, a sleek black car arrived. Heads turned as Walter Carson stepped out. His steps were slower now, his shoulders less stiff with pride. Age had softened him in ways time alone never could. He walked forward alone, toward Ben, as everyone watched. Ben faced him, calm and still. Walter spoke quietly. "We spend lifetimes running from our mistakes, but sometimes all it takes is one moment to stop, turn around and say what matters." Ben said nothing. Walter continued, "You once said I didn't deserve saving. You were right, but Isabel deserved a father who could say thank you. So, thank you for saving me and for loving her in the way I never knew how." He extended a hand. Ben hesitated, then reached out and shook it. The crowd responded with soft applause. Isabel wiped away a tear, her heart too full for words. That night the woods lit up with bonfires and laughter, music drifted between the trees, and the air was thick with warmth. Later Ben led Isabel down a quiet path. Beneath the moonlit canopy he took her hands. "I don't have much," he said. "No fortune, just this, heart. And that old cabin where it all began." He held out a small ring, pine wood and silver, smooth, imperfect, beautiful. Isabel gasped, eyes shining. "I can't promise ease," he said, "but I can promise truth and love." She nodded, voice barely a whisper. "This is all I've ever wanted." When he slipped the ring on her finger, the forest seemed to sigh in approval. From behind, their small crowd clapped quietly, joy rippling through the night like wind through the trees. By morning, Pine Shelter Center came to life. Children played beneath the trees. The elderly sipped tea on the porch. Veterans shared stories in quiet corners of peace. Ben stood beside Isabel at the railing, hands clasped. Behind them, Walter Carson sat with a cup of tea, watching, not as a CEO, but as a father who had finally come home. Ben looked at Isabel. "Some people search a lifetime for home." She smiled. "And some hearts," she said, "just need one storm to remember how to love again." They stood there, side by side, in a place born from pain and now alive with hope. And so, in the quiet heart of Pine Ridge, where pain once echoed through the trees, healing found its voice. From a chance encounter in a storm to a love that defied all odds, Ben and Isabel taught us that sometimes the deepest wounds bring forth the most beautiful new beginnings. Because love isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers in the rustle of leaves, in the warmth of a cabin fire, or in the simple act of staying when it's easier to walk away. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
I hope you enjoyed this thrilling journey. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story? Let me know in the comments below. Your feedback inspires more epic tales.